These are the most insane punishments used on slaves. One of America's biggest disasters, slavery, resulted in unfathomable human misery and a staggering number of lives lost. Many examples of human cruelty while in positions of authority are discussed, and the Stanford jail experiment is often brought up. However, instances like these may be seen right here in our own past. Slaves might be punished for many different things, including stealing, sloth, escaping, and even speaking their own language. Slaves were allegedly also subjected to sport-related punishments. Here are a few examples of such punishments. Follow this video to the end to know all about it. Whipping. Slaves, especially pregnant women and children, were often flogged as a form of punishment in the United States. Gordon, also known as Whipped Peter, was a slave whose back was elevated with a lattice of scars from cruel and repeated whippings, as shown in a now iconic photograph of the slave. There are, however, proprietors who have gone farther. Owners would tear open their slaves' wounds and apply substances like red pepper and turpentine when they saw their injuries were healing. Some versions describe how a slave's master crushed up a brick into dust, combined it with grease, and applied it to the slave's wounds. Mutilation. Especially in the fields and on cotton plantations, slaves were subjected to harsh physical circumstances. Slaves who performed domestic labor for their owners were obligated to maintain a spotless appearance at all times. Slave owners often ordered the mutilation of their captives, especially after violent incidents among slaves or when slaves defied masters or overseers. Sometimes this required more drastic measures, such as chopping at the skin or even cutting off an ear. Some cases were so terrible that limbs were amputated, eyes were gouged out, hamstrings were cut, or both sexes were castrated. The victims were often not given any kind of medical attention. Infection, blood loss, and other problems claimed the lives of several. Brandings. Searing the skin with a hot metal tool is what is meant by the term branding. The purpose of this kind of torture was usually to establish ownership. Branding slaves was a common practice among large corporations to prevent the resale of stolen workers. In the end, these trademarks were utilized as physical proof, contradicting the assertions of bigger corporations that they had never engaged in such a procedure. Slaves who attempted to escape punishment by branding were legal under the Code Noir in Louisiana. Many people were subject to this order since by 1840, New Orleans had become the biggest slave market in America. In other regions like the South, fugitives were often punished by being branded on the forehead. Slave faces were often scorched with letters or other identifying marks. When this happened, the individual in question was often barred from being assigned to any home or performing duties. Burned to death by cigarettes. Slave states eventually established legislation protecting the health, safety, and rights of slaves. Slaves should have been shielded from harsh treatment in theory. Most of the time, these regulations were ignored. Some narratives detail the rise in popularity of various forms of abuse and punishment in various states. Fugitive slave William W. Brown elaborated on a method often used there. He said that one master would chain his slaves up and beat them in the smokehouse. When that wasn't enough punishment, he built a fire with tobacco stems and smoked the slaves to death. The pig's head. Freed slaves perhaps have the most disturbing stories to tell about slave mistreatment. Moses Roper's mother was a slave to his English master and a mixture of African and Native American blood. When Moses finally managed to break out from captivity, he documented his experiences in a book. He described the humiliations and tortures that African Americans went through while in America. Some slave masters, according to Moses' account, engage in physical torture only for the sake of fun. A slave owner, he said, would hammer nails into a hogshead, a very big barrel, and then leave the tips of the nails sticking out inside. Slaves would be loaded into these barrels before being rolled down long, steep slopes while the master and other slaves looked on. Hovering above the stove or oven. Aside from Harriet, another person who escaped slavery and chronicled her experiences was Jacobs. The slave owner's wife tried to stop the sexual harassment, but she eventually fell into the ownership of the owner. Harriet hid for 7 years in the attic of her grandmother's house in order to evade him, eventually escaping to England. Another frightening tale Harriet recounted was about a slaveholder who resided in her neighborhood. His slave population was in the hundreds. His preferred method of punishment was to tie up a slave, hang him in the air, and light a fire above him. The fire was used to prepare a hunk of pork belly. After that, the slave's naked flesh caught the drippings of the burning fat. That's it. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and thanks for watching.